One of the things you can be virtually certain of in life is that you don't get something you don't aim at. And one of the things that's interesting about that is often people will keep their goals fuzzy. Because one of the problems with specifying your goals is you specify your failures. Right? If the goal is really fuzzy, you're not sure when you fail, and then you can fool yourself. You know, really, but you can kind of keep it foggy. But you make your goals sharp and clear. Then, well, first of all, then you know what to aim at. And what's interesting is, you know, your brain is set up so that it reorganizes the world around your aims. And that's not, I've also written about this in 12 Rules for Life quite extensively, and that's not a metaphor. Like, we don't see much of the world, because there's a lot of the world and there isn't much of us. And so we see what we aim at, we aim with our eyes. And here's an example. So, like, great apes don't really have much of a white in their eyes, but human beings do. And the reason for that is that we've evolved to detect where everyone else is looking. And so if I can't tell where you're looking, I don't know what you're up to. And then, well, over time, that means I can't read you as well, and we're more likely to get in a dispute, and one or the other of us is more likely to get killed. But it also means that your probability of finding a successful mate decreases. So we've evolved to have this very, very visually evident eye. And so when we're looking at each other, we're always looking at our eyes, because then we can tell where someone is pointed, and then we can tell what they're up to. And so we're hunting creatures, like we're aiming at a moving target and trying to track it all the time. And so you have to specify your aim, and it's more than one aim. It's like you have a highest aim, which you might say is to be a good person, and then I would say, well, there's a more elaborated aim than that. It's like you want to be able to constrain malevolence and work to decrease suffering. It's something like that. That's the highest aim. And then you have to decompose that into the things you do each day, so that there's a definite connection between all the micro actions and the macro aim, and then that gives dignity to what you're doing.
This person isn't carrying their load, and they think I should do their work. What should I do now? And, you know, the answer is, yeah. Someone wants you to do their work. Do their work.
Yes,
do their work. I'll do that all day long.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, you don't want to do your job. That's fine. I'll do it. Yeah. And actually, I just answered a question where somebody said, the guy's a friend of mine, and he's not carrying his load. What should I do? And I said, well, how about you help him? What's going on at home? Is he going through a divorce? Has he got issues? Is his kid sick? How about you help him and say, hey, let me take that off your plate right now? Because in 2 months or 6 months, you might be the person that needs help. You might be the person with a sick child. But regardless of that, maybe he's just as lazy, and maybe he shouldn't be your friend, and maybe eventually he won't be your friend, but nonetheless, the solution is the same. If you don't want to do your work, that's fine, I'll do it for you.
Yeah, well, that's such a funny thing. That's exactly right, because, you know, what you want to do in your job is make yourself indispensable, right? And the way you make yourself indispensable is by being indispensable. And the way you do that is by doing a bunch of things that, if they're not done, catastrophe occurs. And that's exactly right. So if there's someone around you and they're abdicating their responsibility and you can pick it up, it's like, what an opportunity. You know, you think, well, I'm not going to get credit for it. It's like, well, first of all, there's lots of different forms of credit, but you learn. And then when the company shrinks and they're looking at who to keep, you know, they think, oh, well, it turns out you're doing all sorts of things. We can't do without you. That's not what we expected. We can't do without you. Here's some more things you could do. You know, and then you're also in a position to bargain. You can say, well, look, you know, in order for me to keep doing this level of responsibility, you know, I need to be paid more because I have other options, or because it's just, or because that will make me more efficient. But then you've got some power too, because they need you. And so indispensability, and that's power. Indispensability is power, not tyranny. You can't exist outside of a framework of value. It's not possible. It's not technically possible. I outline this in quite a bit of detail in chapter 10, which is called Rule 10, which is called be precise in your speech, is that the way the world manifests itself to you is integrally tied to your value structure. And that's because, to put it very simply, is that your very vision is dependent on an aim. Like, whenever you look at the world, you're aiming at something. You're aiming at something with your eyes. You can't focus on something without aiming at it, and you won't aim at it without valuing it. So your very perceptions are dependent on your value structure. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't a world. it does mean that experience is a complex interplay of your value structure and the unmanifest world. It's something like that. And then that begs the question, which is, well, if you have to have a value structure, then what should it be? Well, and then that brings us back to the ideas that we were talking about earlier. Like you should value being. You should take on the responsibility of being as your highest ethical obligation and try to improve it, try to reduce suffering, try to make the most out of yourself in a way that's beneficial to you and your family and your community. You should aim high, and your perceptions will reconfigure themselves around those aims, and that will allow the world to manifest itself to you in the most positive possible manner, or at least in the most meaningful possible manner. And in the absence of that, all you have is stupid suffering. That is the anxiety and depression that we talked about earlier. Without a point, without value, without an aim, all you're left with is the misery and anxiety of life. That makes people bitter.
I love to bring up the notion of the aim, because one can react to this stupid suffering in a number of ways, but this is so clear. You write in it, you say, you cannot aim yourself at anything if you are completely undisciplined and untutored. Mm-hmm. You will not know what to target, you won't fly straight, even if you do get your aim right. And then you will conclude there is nothing to aim for, and then you will be lost. And these days, the prevailing moral framework, as I see it, is if it feels good, do it. How is it that discipline and the straight and narrow offer the best chance for a good life? And how is it that we have forgotten that is the case?
Well, the reason that discipline is necessary is because you're a mass of competing short-term interests. And so the question is then, well, which short-term interest should win out? And the answer to that is, well, none of them. They need to be organized into a hierarchy that makes them functional across time and across individuals. So like a 2-year-old is very likely to act out his or her proximal impulse. But of course, a 2-year-old can't survive in the world. You have to bring your primary instincts, let's say, under the regulatory structure of a higher order value system that allows them to manifest themselves without undue mutual sacrifice across large spans of time in the presence of large numbers of other people. So that requires a very sophisticated ordering. It's like, we already talked about the fact that a meta-narrative is necessary to unite subcultures, say, so that they can operate peacefully and harmoniously within the same space. The same thing applies within you, because you're an internal coalition of warring, single-minded tribes, and they have to all be brought under the organizational structure of long-term collective vision, let's say. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, you have to be disciplined. And any discipline, technically speaking, is an attempt to bring all those competing short-term impulses under a larger scale and more inclusive framework. And so you do that, and then, well, that's actually what gives you freedom. Being impulsive and being free aren't the same things, because if you're impulsive, you're just the slave of your impulses.
Right.
There's no freedom in that. That's the same freedom, so to speak, literally, that a 2-year-old has, because a 2-year-old isn't socialized yet. So that doesn't function in the sophisticated world. It doesn't work.
Right.
Everyone knows it.
We just like to pretend sometimes to say, oh, that does feel good, Now, I have one last...
Well, we like to pretend all the time, because that's why we go out and drink, because drinking enables you to blind yourself to the long-term consequences of your actions. And there's no doubt that that's very, very rewarding in the short term, but it's also why you wake up the next morning hungover and ashamed.